Good morning, church family. Hey, I hope you're doing okay with the sheltering in place. I know people are starting to get edgy, and we're living in close quarters, and we have different ways of dealing with shelter in place. And sometimes it brings up issues between us. What brings one person pleasure annoys the other person. Video games, maybe you like them, maybe you hate them. Sleeping in. One person wants to do projects, and another person wants to avoid projects. There's baking, there's exercising. Some folks are all talked out, and others are just getting started. And in that culture and in that climate, things can get sideways really fast. So I wanted to talk to you today about forgiveness. And I wanted to tell you a funny story. My niece approached my sister one time when they had their 20-year anniversary. And she said, "Mom, what's the key to longevity in marriage?" And I think she expected her mom to say, long walks on the beach, talking things out, not going to bed angry. But she said, in one word, forgiveness. Forgiveness. She said that was the key to longevity in marriage. And even though Charlie was a little disappointed, I thought that Jana's answer was profound. Because no matter who you're journeying with, forgiveness becomes key at going the distance. And so I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit today. We recently talked about forgiveness in Kidstown. I am the kids pastor at the Gilroy campus. And we decided that forgiveness is deciding that someone who's wronged you doesn't have to pay. That's how we explained it to kids. But it's also a really clear way for adults to understand it too. I want to go to Colossians for our passage today, specifically chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 12. And here the Apostle Paul is talking about conduct for godly living and for Christians. And let's listen to what he has to say, starting in verse 12. It says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved." Oh, that's a qualifier right there. We're God's chosen people. We're holy and we're dearly loved. Then he gives us the commandment. Clothe yourselves. He gives us 5 things to clothe ourselves with. Listen to these. Sometimes you might be saying ouch after each one of them. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Those are hard things to do when we're living on top of each other and we can't get out. Okay, then in verse 13 he says, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you have a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." That's huge. "And over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." And verse 15 says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful." That's a ton right there. That's verse 12 through 15. And I kind of wanted to focus today on that part that said, "Forgive as Christ forgave you." That puts a whole new light on forgiveness. It reminds me of Corrie ten Boom. She had to practice forgiveness in a really big way. She had to forgive the people who had imprisoned her and actually had killed her father and her sister in concentration camps. And she has a really famous story about meeting this guy who was one of the prison guards and finding that moment where he puts his hand out to shake her hand upon meeting her and recognizing her. And in that moment, she had a decision to make. And she made the decision to put her hand out and shake his hand. Not because she felt like it, but because she wanted to be obedient to Christ. She made the point that forgiveness is not an emotion. It's an act of the will. We make the choice to act out of obedience. And through that, we become a channel of the Holy Spirit, through which God can reach out to heal a broken world. Pretty profound. Now you might think, yeah, there's big things that we have to forgive. And we know stories about people who've had to overcome big things. But in the day in and day out, there's little things we need to forgive too and be forgiven of. I think that's one of the reasons why the Lord's Prayer has that whole passage in there about forgiving others and asking for forgiveness, because it's a daily thing that has to be undertaken. I recently was challenged with a big challenge to forgive in my life as a life tragedy came my way. And so I've done a lot of personal inventory and a lot of work in this area. And I want to encourage you today that I've really come to understand that forgiveness is a process. It's not a once and done thing. I think that's another reason why it's part of the daily discipline of the Lord's Prayer. And I wanted to share with you a quote from a book I read that was super helpful to me. The book is called Unconditional by Brian Zand. And when considering the alternative to forgiveness, which is unforgiveness and resentment, it might help you to understand why forgiveness is so important. Let me just read a paragraph to you from his book and see if this resonates with you. It says, the world of resentment and bitterness is small and ever shrinking. It's an ever shrinking world. It is a world of ever diminishing possibilities. It is a world on a trajectory of collapse into the singularity of resentment. Unforgiveness has a devastating way of eliminating new possibilities. Everything remains chained to the past, and the suffered injustice becomes the single informing event in the life of an embittered soul. But the choice to forgive breaks the tyranny of justice and the bitterness it seeks to create. Wow. It seems like forgiveness is the key to having a future and to having healing take place in your life. You know, sometimes we think, well, if I just heal somebody, if I just forgive somebody, it feels cheap. It feels like I'm not going to have justice. I'm just going to give up on justice, and I'm just going to do this cheap thing and forgive somebody. But actually, when we forgive somebody, we simply transfer that justice over to God. It's off of us, it's on to God, and we're freed from our past and able to embrace our future. And so God wants us to learn to receive and extend forgiveness, because it's part of our health. So today, I want you to think about that. Is there somebody that you know you need to forgive? Sometimes somebody just pops immediately into your mind. And sometimes we've kind of shouldered and taken on this way of living that's full of resentment and distrust, but we don't even really remember why. I want you to take some time today and take inventory and ask God to give you the courage to pursue forgiveness. It's not something we can do on our own, but God will help us to do it. God bless you.